listening to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
Digital Therapeutics, known as DTX, are evidence-based therapeutic interventions driven by software to prevent, manage, or treat a medication disorder or disease. Pharmacists play a critical role in the adoption of digital therapeutics, and this series will provide the latest on the innovations in pharmacy care.
Hey, not sure if you've heard through Yahoo Finance. I think this just came out just this week. I think it was posted June 21st. The global digital therapeutic market is projected to reach $42 billion. That's a B, $42 billion by 2030. And that growth in digital therapeutics is mainly attributed to the rising adoption of digital health, increasing the focuses on preventative health care, growing prevalence of chronic diseases, and the rising penetration of smart technologies such as artificial intelligence and wearables. Reason why I'm here today, and I'm thrilled about this interview. So if you can't hear how excited I am, you'll hear it throughout this interview, is digital therapeutics and digital health and pharmacists is one of the most fun topics I love bringing people on and leaders that are talking about this. And if you haven't already heard the interview with Shaheen Lakan, he's a physician, chief medical officer at Click Therapeutics. We'll have links in our show notes to take you to that interview. But today we have the chief of all of this in Click Therapeutics, the CEO, the one and only David Klein, that's with me today talking about Click Therapeutics and how important digital therapeutics are going to be for our future. David, I am thrilled to have you here.
Thank you, Todd, and thanks to the Pharmacy Podcast Network for hosting me. To be frank, Shaheen's a tough act to follow, but I will try my best. So,
yeah, I think you're going to do just fine. Like I said, I've been internet stalking you through LinkedIn and through Google, and I just find you fascinating and what Click's doing. And to me, my heroes are pharmacists and how they leverage technology and how I see pharmacogenomics and nutrigenomics and testing and point of care testing and what's taking place. And this falls into that tool bag for them so that they understand when it fits a disease state to interject and encourage the use of technology to manage disease states and conditions. It's a win-win. And the physicians love the data that's coming back from the usage of this. But before I get into the meat of today's interview about Click Therapeutics, I want to hear about you, David. Tell us about yourself and how your personal and professional journey led you to Click.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking that. I mean, I would say it's been, certainly a long journey, and really it goes back some, 10 plus years almost, where I was actually at the time working in biotech, really in kind of biotech company formation, investing, operating, business development, and recruiting, all within the biotech industry. And the biotech investment industry more specifically. And at that time, I really saw this kind of massive rise in the mobile phone and how really, years ago, not everyone had these kind of smartphones that could go on the internet and kind of do all these things that they can do now. And as I saw this kind of rise of the mobile phone take root, at the very same time, I saw, many different kind of pharma companies were retreating a bit out of the CNS space. The outcomes, especially when you're trialing things in that area, are kind of notoriously more subjective, right? It's not like a cancer trial where you either shrink the tumor or you don't, and so on and so forth. But at that same time, I saw that, look, this mobile phone is clearly changing people's behavior, and I believed really, leading to the rewiring of some people's brains, and kind of put two and two together. I was working with the fellow who at the time was the head of clinical neuropsychiatry from Cornell, and we thought, look, if we could harness the power of this phone to direct that cognitive and behavioral change towards diseases, we could use software to really drive very meaningful clinical and ultimately economic outcomes. So we formed a company called Therapeutics and created a term called Digital Therapeutics, and really just got to work, kind of formed this biotech-like model around that thesis, and started building our first programs.
Well, congratulations on the success so far. It is not easy. I've been an entrepreneur myself for 14 years, and I literally feel like I'm just getting started, where the layering of the network and the people and the product and everything that you put in place, I feel like it's just getting ready to finally get going. And it's not a road that many can travel. It's difficult. And I think of moments in my life that really was a crossroads. And I know that our healthcare system is at that crossroads. The pharmacy profession is at a crossroads. We're having pharmacists transform from reactive to proactive and becoming much more collaborative with physicians and the technologies at their fingertips that are ready for them. And some of our pharmacists are grasping at it and are ready. Others, just based on people's personalities, they're playing catch up. But I want to come back to you for a minute and just think of a particular moment or an experience that solidified your personal path, your personal crossroads, to get into prescription digital therapeutics.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's an interesting question. I almost say it was a collection of moments, and maybe I'll kind of harp on a couple of them. It was really, once we had this idea that, look, we can kind of prove out that these software can drive clinical outcomes. We took us a couple years, but built our first early programs, and then started to generate clinical data. And I think it was really, based on the early clinical data that we generated years ago, maybe 8 years ago, that I started to really think, wow, this is very real. And I had kind of known it was real. There were early data on computer programs helping people. And, frankly, some of this, and part of the reason why I got into digital therapeutics really is some of it's pretty de-risked, because you already know that these interventions will help people. It's just a matter of engaging them and getting them to use and do the intervention. But it's not until you see really, or at least for me, till I saw that our technology was really helping to treat people's diseases, that it became very, very real. The impact that we were having on people's lives were very clear, and the clinical outcomes were quite compelling. And it's really that moment, I'd say maybe eight years ago, that this really solidified kind of my mindset and the pathway, in kind of seeing firsthand how we could develop software that can be a tremendous impact on people's lives.
I'm sure you hear in my voice how excited I get around the fusion of tech and pharmacists, and how it's going to help pharmacists to dig deeper into clinical conditions, disease states, rare diseases, especially in specialty pharmacy. So let's talk about prescription digital therapeutics, and let's kind of give examples to our listeners. What disease states, what conditions do best fit, or I don't want to say lowest hanging fruit, but where are we seeing most success in the leverage and the usage of digital therapeutics?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would say that we're seeing these programs be leveraged in a great deal of different ways. And that's not to say that the industry is advanced or embedded in the medical system yet, or really anything like that. I mean, I'd say, if we're in the first inning here, Todd, we're in the top half of it. It really just begun. And we are just now starting to see extremely robust randomized controlled trials that are driving, I mean, dare I say, kind of drug-like outcomes, but with no real safety issues. So I think that there's a ways to go before we can start to really point to very meaningful changes within our medical system that are at scale, if that makes sense. But we are starting to see that, at least see the stage set for that.
So, you've been in it long enough to understand where we're going and what we want, which is the data, the outcomes of progressional therapies or titration. I'm thinking of opioid use disorder. I'm thinking of mental health. I'm thinking of lung diseases that leverage the smart inhalers and the data that's going to come from that. So have you witnessed firsthand the positive impact prescription digital therapeutics have on people's lives?
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to really witness it firsthand in a big way, and more and more as time goes on. And we've seen and received all kinds of direct feedback on our programs, and people will be amazingly thankful that one of our programs, let's say, helped and changed their lives, and that's really moving. I mean, there's nothing more moving than to think, well, this person, person X would be in an entirely different place in their life from a health perspective than if not for us, and for other folks developing these types of interventions. So certainly have witnessed that firsthand, and I think what you're also starting to see here really are these programs' ability to kind of bridge such a meaningful access gap, and whereas people might not have terrific access to psychotherapists or psychiatrists or whoever it may be, a digital therapy can essentially reach anywhere in the world. I mean, and if you talk about the U.S., from your most rural area to the innermost parts of cities, these programs can easily reach the folks. And on top of that, so many of these disorders, and some of them you mentioned there, can be, dare I say, kind of stigmatized within a community, right? Where people don't necessarily want to talk about or admit or go seek help for some types of disorders, or some people for any disorder or disease. But at the same time, digital therapeutics really a very significant part of the promise here are that somebody could potentially be able to access these programs ultimately in the comfort of their own homes, and privately, should they so choose to do that. So
David, I want you to dig in for a second for listeners and provide an overview on what Click does today, so that they can get a visualization as they're driving or jogging or wherever they're consuming their podcast, to get a better idea of what Click Therapeutics does.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'll try to sum it up, as kind of high level as possible, and to give someone that doesn't necessarily understand this this industry too well what we're doing. I mean, at the highest level, we're developing something that we call prescription digital therapeutics. So these are really apps that are proven in randomized controlled trials to treat disease, and we're seeking clearance from FDA and then international regulatory bodies to really ultimately make those claims. So similar to like a drug, a drug vial might say, or a drug jar, a pill bottle, might have a label these programs will ultimately have labels as well. That, this program is, indicated to, let's say, lower blood pressure in adults or whatever that might be. And it's revolutionary. And I mean, why I think and why I'm grateful, Todd, that you're doing this interview and kind of really focused on this topic for your pharmacy network is because this is unlike other categories of medicine in the past that have been meaningful and, from cell therapy or gene therapy. Digital therapeutics, and in particular, prescription digital therapeutics, are really poised to enter into the standard of care of kind of everyday medicine, right? So these programs are likely to be prescribed by physicians and by doctors for such a wide variety of different diseases that within the next 5 years, people I know, people friends, family members, they'll go into a physician's office and that doctor will say, or they'll, consult a physician, right? And that physician will say, hey, you have high blood pressure and, why don't you try this medication, but also use this digital program. It's a 8-week FDA cleared program. It's been helping a lot of my other patients. Frankly, sometimes they can even taper down or go off their medications if they're successful on the program. And that's where this is headed. So it's a very important question because unlike other new forms of medicine, these are really on the cusp of entering into standard of care in a much more significant way in terms of touching all the lives of kind of people we know. It's not really a narrow focus. These programs are being proven and will be proven to affect change and drive a positive clinical outcomes in almost all of the most common diseases and disorders. So Click takes a very science-led kind of biotechnology approach, if you will, to these programs, except that our biochemistry is essentially technology and a digital, and our products are evidence-based mobile apps, although we're classified as medical devices. And we're really looking to create value where, pharmacotherapy alone might not be enough. And where we do that is either by working independently or in conjunction with pharmacotherapy. So that would depend on the therapeutic area. But sometimes these programs could be prescribed independently for disease, sometimes in combination with the pharmacotherapy, but all with the end purpose of driving better clinical outcomes. And at the end of the day, I mean, what we're really looking to do is to expand the possibilities of medicine by developing and validating these apps as actual treatments, right? So, people really embracing the space as, hey, this app is medicine, as opposed to the kind of broader field of digital health or, wellness apps that, may not either have or frankly be able to generate that level of clinical evidence where it's rigorous and really as rigorous as you'd see drugs be validated. So we're progressing a broad pipeline of these different prescription digital therapeutics and really in different stages of proving that they work in randomized controlled trials. And to get this done and kind of how we do it is really a team of clinicians, neuroscientists, researchers, designers, engineers, really all the components of a technology company kind of merged with all the components of a biotech company, and we're all working together on this common mission, and that's to really treat disease using apps and to prove that these are efficacious treatments. So, that's a long answer. I could go on and on, but that's the high level.
No, I appreciate that. And I see things from different perspectives that try to balance how a therapy was kicked off and started through the prescription, through the prescribing, the diagnosis, our physician, the quarterback, and then the pitch of the treatment out to the wide receiver, pharmacist, or nurse practitioner, someone to follow up with the treatment. And so when we think of the pressures on our physicians that they only have so much time to see their patients. We know that pharmacists are seeing their those same patients 9 times more a year than what the primary care is what physicians are seeing. Immediately, I think of technology as a go-between to assure that therapies stay on track. In a recent article through CIO.com, it was titled Transforming Heart Care with Evidence-Based Digital Therapeutics. And there's an excerpt inside here that talks about a study from JAMA studies that state close to 50 to 60% of patients after 9 months stopped adhering to their medication protocol. And they need what they're calling life care managers and relationship builders that these patients have to trust in order to keep driving adherence and keep them on medication protocol, whether that's medication adherence or some kind of rehabilitation. And when I think of technology, David, I know you're thinking the same way. There needs to be a divide with a bridge in the divide between our prescribers and then the clinicians and people that are carrying the treatments through to make sure that we're not bottlenecking care for patients. And I think that's one of the key barriers to getting prescriptions out that are digital therapeutics. And that's what I want to hear from your perspective, because you're in this every day. What do you think the key barriers are and some of the challenges that you face as CEO of Click Therapeutics in moving forward and getting this much more adopted, getting it much more prescribed, especially when it aligns with the right condition or disease state? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, and another good question. Thanks for asking that. I mean, I think, ultimately, as I said, you're really just starting to see a kind of, I'd call it almost a new category of this space, and call it prescription digital therapeutics 2.0, that are really testing the apps that they develop in bona fide, robust, randomized controlled trials against, let's say, shams, kind of our version of a placebo almost, right? And you're just starting to see these levels of evidence be published that really are priming the market for potential broad acceptance of prescription digital therapeutics. So it's still a real novel idea. I mean, the kind of primary barrier, I'd say, for now, or really lies in the awareness of this space, right? And some of the confusion possibly around this space, and what's digital health, and what's digital therapeutics, and what's prescription digital therapeutics. And ultimately, I think that you'll see real separation as some of these programs, and they're far and few between, but they exist, and there's becoming more and more of them, as some of them prove real drug-like outcomes, but with no safety issues in real randomized controlled trials that are kind of very hard to dispute. You'll see that adoption come much more naturally, where there will be a real clamor for this. Hey, I'd rather be on this program. It has the same potential effect as something that could potentially give me massive side effects, whether that be weight gain or high blood pressure or high blood sugar, whatever that might be, right? So I say that some of the barrier is that really in the kind of first wave of these programs, you've seen, pretty kind of limited set of evidence generation, where, companies have kind of come forward and thought, well, some narrow FDA clearance could be enough, let's say, to commercialize this program and to make it successful. But ultimately, I think that the stakeholders and the pharmacists, the providers, the payers, I don't think that they're going to lower their bar for digital. I think that the biggest barrier is that they really haven't seen programs move forward yet that live up to that same high bar of other medicine that they're prescribing or dispensing. And that's what we're on the cusp of doing as an industry here, and that the market is primed to kind of see that through. So I think once you start to see, more of these programs really with these robust evidence sets, it'll be a much more natural flow. So, what you're seeing in the market now isn't really as much of a barrier of, oh, well, it's digital, so we don't know, and so on. It's much more of a barrier in clinical evidence. Well, this thing really hasn't been through an actual randomized controlled trial, right? Or this has been through an unblinded study, right? Or, some of these kind of things. And people often confuse that with, oh, digital is, hard to proliferate, but it's really any medicine with, limited evidence to support its efficacy is always going to be, a kind of difficult road to go down.
David, when I was getting our interview set up, when I was reading through some of the information that I was searching for specifically on the adoption of digital therapeutics specific to a condition, and then how that data is being shared with electronic health records and follow-up therapy, pharmacists, physician teams, I immediately thought of the same kind of trail for payers, prescribers, follow-up therapists, pharmacists in the adoption of pharmacogenomics, and how the study of, hey, how's the medication affecting you based on your DNA and your breakdown of that medication versus someone else. And then there's so much more that goes into it than that. But it almost brings me back to our conversation today and thinking, well, how do we get this paid for? Because pharmacogenomics went through that same thing. I remember 2015 was doing a special project through UPMC Enterprises here in Pittsburgh around finding meaningful, repeatable, proven metrics through ICD-9 codes at the time. Now, of course, it's ICD-10, of how to get billers and payers to pay for PGX tests. So I'm thinking, well, in your world, CEO of Click Therapeutics, let's talk about the concerns that you have for reimbursement and then the adoption of digital therapeutics more fluidly, per se. So what are your concerns with reimbursement?
Yeah, and another good question. I do have some, I'd say, real concerns about reimbursement, but not really from the practical perspective that you might think. My concerns are more around the perception of reimbursement. And, I would remember that here in the US especially, ultimately, for better or worse, the payers are businesses, right? And companies like ours and manufacturers and developers of these programs are really, in my view, obligated to prove, not just kind of health and clinical utility, but also health economic value. And you have to remember that the first kind of, we call them kind of PDT 1.0s, right? The first wave of these programs that have moved forward, it's not like they had a compelling, in general, health economic story, right? They're not going to payers and saying, hey, look, we've proven that not only is this program validated in a randomized controlled trial or a series of randomized controlled trials, But we're also saving, on average per patient, $10,000 a year or $50,000 a year, and kind of conclusively putting that forward. And I do have a tremendous amount of faith in the reimbursement system. And frankly, and I don't know if this is the best way to say it, but faith in, there's one of the great aspects of capitalism here is that it's an efficient market. And if you're going to a payer, a provider, a patient, you're saying, hey, look, here's concrete proof that, every time this program is prescribed, it'll save your organization $20,000. A year, it allows the physician to prescribe something that they haven't been able in the past, and that more effectively treats the disease. And for the patient, they can use it in the comfort of their own home and without side effects. I have a tremendous amount of faith that paradigm will shift when the evidence is there. It's almost impossible for it not to be, because ultimately, for better or worse, these are businesses, whether, it's a provider's practice or whether it's a payer. But I think what we've seen is a real lack of health economic evidence in the proof. And without that evidence, it's going to be very hard to get adoption. So I think we have to, hold these programs. If you're going to get them in the medical system and expect, pharmacists, for example, to be educating people on them and speaking about them, they've just got to have drug-like quality evidence that not only proves their clinical utility, but also the economic value to the system. And that really is happening. It's on the cusp of happening. There's a number of programs out there that are really proving that. And I think we're going to start to see in the coming years a very significant adoption of these programs. And I would like to think, and I firmly believe, that in many respects, these are on the cusp of changing the whole world of medicine.
So I have always a place where I like to get someone like you, David's opinion on application and usage and tools. Maybe that's the key word, is tool. And I think, just as an example, I love the discussions around PGX pharmacogenomics. And so that tool to assess the titration, or no, not the titration, the absorption, the ability to respond to a medication as designed, and your DNA might not respond the way that mine does. And so a pharmacist that sees someone coming in with a specific prescription, knowing that it's for, some medication that 50% of the people aren't able to absorb it as planned or break it down. And sure enough, they say, hey, I should run this test. Today, in today's world, we have to have pharmacists reach out to a physician to get the prescription to run that test. And to me, that's backwards. Because if I'm an electrician and I need my screwdriver to get a job done, I need to run this test to make sure that this electronic circuit is working as it's supposed to. And I'm thinking of Click Therapeutics and the technologies almost in the same way, where we have, let's jettison into the future, 5 years into the future, smoking cessation, depression, schizophrenia, migraines. We have Click Therapeutics. They have all the publications out there. Everything's working. But your physician might not be saying, hey, you're having these serious headaches. You're on this medication. I need you to also use this technology platform and this app to really help us gauge what's happening with you. What happens if it's the patient that finally goes back to their trusted pharmacist and they're explaining what they're going through with their migraines, for example, and the pharmacist says, wow, you know what would really work in this instance, because of so many of my other patients that have gone through the same thing, you should really be using a a PDT. You should really be using a prescription digital therapeutic to help us get more data and more follow-up. And, we know the studies. So this is more about pharmacists right now, not to put you on the spot, David, but what should pharmacists know about PDTs at this point? And then where does it lie where do we get pharmacists kind of taking some leads in the leveraging of PDTs versus physicians? And I guess they could always go back to the physician and say, hey, please write this prescription because I think based on all of my other patients that have had great outcomes from this, we should be using this. But boy, I always wrestle with who leads and when we come up for opportunities to leverage PDTs and technology. So what do you think pharmacists should know more about prescription digital therapeutics?
That is a great question, Todd. And I mean, to your point, right? I think the average person probably sees their pharmacist a lot more than they see their physician. And I do think that pharmacists have an important role here, potentially really, as to your point, the tip of the spear. And in no small part due to the fact, and as you noted, what can the pharmacist do here? I mean, these programs will require probably a good deal more, at least on the front end, of real kind of expertise and counseling how to use it and explaining. I mean, a pharmacist could go pretty far. I mean, in theory, they could download the program with them, right? So there's and what pharmacists should expect here are that inherently these programs are much more likely to be extremely safe, right? And to have less, let's say, polypharmacy type issues and so on and so forth. And I think that you could see these programs even lead to some of the transition on that pharmacist role and kind of how they interact with the patient, because really on the drug side, I mean, there's a relatively limited amount that the pharmacist does with explaining. You don't have to explain to someone exactly how to swallow the pill, right? But if a pharmacist became really intricately familiar with these programs, I mean, not only, frankly, and I know people don't think about this a lot, I think it would make the pharmacist role even more interesting and frankly fun, right? They have a tool they can even show and interact with the patient and form a stronger bond as they're dispensing it. But the pharmacist could play an absolutely key and massive role here. I mean, just envision somebody going into the pharmacy's office, and that could be an elderly patient that might not be as good with apps, right? Envision that pharmacist dispensing this, essentially, for lack of a better word, with that patient and getting them set up and showing them, look, all you have to do every day, just do your mission. It's that simple. That type of experience, and if you look at it, the pharmacist could play such a massive role in driving clinical outcomes there, because our programs are all about engagement, and it's about not just dispensing a prescription code in these, but someone's got to download the program, they've got to set up, they've got to use it. Mm-hmm. And I really do think that this could be a moment in the pharmacy profession that could potentially vest the patient and the pharmacist much closer together with directly affecting clinical outcomes. Because if a pharmacist can sit there and help a tough patient get started, we can do the rest of the work here, right? Once they're in, we can we've been enormously successful at deploying and utilizing AI even before it was cool, Todd, to drive more and more engagement and really personalize these programs. So we're very, very successful at engaging that patient once they've enrolled and downloaded. but, we're not on every other street corner or, talking to the patient or, we're just simply, we don't have and never will have that type of presence. So there's a real alliance here that could be much different, frankly, than alliances with pharmacists in the past, where a great pharmacist who's engaged and vested here, quite simply could result in better outcomes on average for these programs when dispensed. So I'm very excited to kind of get closer with the pharmacy or pharmacist community on this, and I think that there's a very significant role added to their already very significant role they play now.
Well, I'm a big nerd, and sounds like you are too. We're in good company with each other, but pharmacists are data nerds. They love nerding out on data. So I could see the innovative pharmacists who love leveraging technology, especially for conditions that they know it's going to make a lot of sense. It's going to drive adherence. It's going to drive connectivity, as well as being able to respond on the fly, whether it's through texting or emails or telehealth and in a secure Zoom meeting of some sort. And I've been thrilled to have you here, David. This has been an honor to have Click Therapeutics participate in our series around digital therapeutics. This is a CEO question to put you on the spot, and we're going to wrap up. But I want to think about your vision as CEO. How do you think Click is going to make a lasting impact in the field of PDTs, of our prescription digital therapeutics, and improving patient health?
Yeah, so I think Click will, and it's really on the cusp of making a tremendous impact. I'd say everything we do is potentially magnified many times over because it's such a fledgling and kind of nascent industry that our successes, both clinically and commercially, could really spurn and result in many more of these companies and programs, whether it's getting funding or getting partners or just building an industry kind of around those successes. So I'll focus on what we think we're going to do, but I just did want to remember that in a nascent industry like that, a rising tide kind of lifts all ships, right? So that's the exciting time, and frankly, in our town halls, I often talk about this, that these successes are so important because we're helping form a whole industry around this thesis and around prescription digital therapeutics. I think ultimately where we'll come in is really helping to treat people with migraine or depression or schizophrenia or different cardiometabolic disorders, or even in many cases, cancer patients, and really developing and getting those programs to patients for treatments that or for diseases that haven't necessarily been treated all the way or entirely, we'll say, before. But and that's because part of our program's work are really, we have mechanisms that are designed to really address the they call it underlying neurological foundation of these programs. And I know Shaheen has talked a lot about that in the past, so I won't get too much into it. But real structural and functional changes in the brain, either that have been built up over a lifetime or damaged by disease, that affect the thoughts, sensations, emotions, and behavior of patients living with these conditions in a way that defines these disease. So repairing these changes, sometimes in conjunction or in tandem with pharmacotherapy, can really maximize the impact, success, and outcome of that patient's treatment. So, I mean, you're talking about eventually, people with migraine, let's say, if we're successful, and I believe that we will be, on average, you will, I believe, have healthier migraine patients than before our digital therapeutic entered that market. Now, that's one side of it. But the other exceedingly exciting part, and I touched this before, is really that access component. It's just the fact that there's patients, and sadly, often these patients aren't put into these sophisticated financial models that say, oh, well, if you have 10,000 patients with migraine, and then 3,000 get this medication. So no one's really talking about the 3,000 or 5,000 migraine patients that aren't getting any treatment at all,
right,
or that simply don't have access to those treatments. And that's where we can play the biggest role. And it's not just here in America, but and Europe and Asia, but also in developing countries. I mean, these programs really can be anywhere in the world, in many areas, including even in America, that many patients, if not all patients, simply don't have access to real medicine to kind of get these treatments. And so we're really paving the way for the healthcare system, where neuromodulatory treatments like Click's prescription programs can really reduce suffering on a global scale. So I really think, and I believe, that, as I said earlier, is unlike other medical or revolutions with new forms of medicine like gene therapies and cell therapies, we're talking about potentially hundreds of millions, if not billions of people that can be helped by prescription digital therapeutics. And that's the real transformative moment for us that I think we will get to in the next 5 to 10 years, where these will be ubiquitous with healthcare. They won't even be digital therapeutics. They'll be therapeutics. They'll just be another form of treatment, and not really called like digital or an app. It's just how you get treated. And that's why it's so exciting, and why I'm always so happy to kind of share what we're doing.
This has been wonderful. David Klein, CEO of Click Therapeutics. I want to thank you for sharing your vision for the future I want to be a part of, and I know pharmacists want to be a part of, because they're passionate about patient care. They can't stop thinking about it. They go to work. That's what they do, is assure that people are cared for, and technology is a part of that. I want to thank you. Hey, throw us in your queue for communications going forward. We'll work with your comms teams to get you to come back and give us an update. And we have to see you at a conference that you're upcoming, later this year. Hopefully we'll be able to meet up in person and get some pictures and talk more about Click Therapeutics in the future. If you're a listener, pharmacist, pharmacy technician, someone in the business of pharmacy, take a look at clicktherapeutics.com. Once again, that's clicktherapeutics.com. David, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you again, Todd, for having me, and have a good day.